Today's number 2 most urgent vulnerability on the ranked list is CVE 2026-42208 in LiteLLM, and it earns the runtime because it sits right at the intersection of AI infrastructure, database exposure, and real-world exploitation signal. This is the Daily Ranked CVE Brief. What to patch first, ranked by real exploitation signal from CISA KEV, First EPSS, and CVSS every day. LiteLLM is commonly used as a proxy, or AI gateway, for calling large language model APIs in an OpenAI-compatible or native format. That means it can sit between your applications and your model providers, managing API access and credentials. When that layer has a critical, unauthenticated SQL injection, the stakes are not just service disruption. The concern is unauthorized access to the proxy's database and the credentials it manages. Here is the plain English version. CVE 2026-42208 affects LiteLLM/LiteLLM, specifically LiteLLM acting as a proxy server or AI gateway. The official description says that from version 1.81.116 to before version 1.83.7, a database query used during proxy API key checks mixed a caller-supplied key value directly into the query text, instead of passing it separately as a parameter. That is CVE-89 SQL injection. In human terms, the application is building a database question in an unsafe way. Data supplied by the caller can become part of the database instruction itself. The reported path involves an unauthenticated request reaching that query through the proxy's error handling path on LLM API routes, such as the chat completions route, named in the advisory text. The important defensive takeaway is simple. Authentication checks should not become a route into unsafe database behavior. Verdict. This is a remotely reachable, unauthenticated flaw with potential full impact consequences, which is why it lands at 9.8 critical. The CVSS vector's most important part is that attack vector is network, privileges required is none, and user interaction is none. In other words, the vulnerable surface can be reached remotely. The attacker does not need a valid account, and nobody inside the organization has to click anything. The second important part is the impact rating. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability are all high. You do not need to memorize every CVSS metric to understand the severity. A database-backed authentication check in an internet-facing AI gateway, reachable without credentials, with potential read and modify impact, is exactly the kind of flaw defenders should move to the front of the patch queue. The real-world signal is what makes this today's number 2, not just the numerical severity score. CISA lists CVE 2026-42208 in the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities catalog. That means defenders should treat it as a vulnerability with known exploitation, not as an academic database bug waiting for attention next quarter. The EPSS percentile is also 0.99647, placing it near the very top of modeled exploitation likelihood compared with other vulnerabilities. The dangerous scenario is straightforward. LiteLLM may manage access to model providers and internal proxy credentials. If an attacker can read data from the proxy database, or possibly modify it, they may be able to gain unauthorized access to the proxy and to credentials under its control. For AI gateways, that can affect more than one application, because the proxy is often a shared control point. To check exposure, start with inventory. Look for any deployment of the LiteLLM proxy server, especially systems used as an AI gateway for applications calling LLM APIs. Confirm the installed version from your package, container image, deployment manifest, or service build metadata, and compare it with the vendor advisory and the fixed release information. The NVD description states the affected range as version 1.81.16 to before version 1.83.7 and says the issue is patched in 1.83.7. Do not stop at version checking. Also map where the proxy is reachable from, the public internet, partner networks, internal application networks, or CI and development environments. Because the described path involves LLM API routes and authorization header handling, any exposed LiteLLM API surface deserves priority review. If you are unsure whether a deployment is affected, treat it as suspect until verified. The primary fix is to update. The official description says this issue has been patched in version 1.83.7, so move affected LiteLLM deployments to the patched version, or follow the vendor's current remediation guidance. Because this is in CISA KEV, prioritize production internet-facing gateways first, then internal shared gateways, staging, and development systems that still hold real credentials. While patching, reduce exposure. Avoid leaving the proxy reachable from untrusted networks unless there is a clear business need and appropriate access control in front of it. Review logs for unusual API authentication failures, unexpected database errors, abnormal access patterns around LLM API routes, and signs of unauthorized changes to proxy configuration or stored keys. If you find evidence of suspicious activity, consider rotating credentials managed by the proxy and reviewing downstream access. Also confirm the database account used by the service has only the permissions it truly needs. Quick recap. CVE 2026-42208 is a critical CVE-89 SQL injection in LiteLLM, an AI gateway proxy used to call LLM APIs. The score is 9.8 because the issue is network reachable, needs no authentication, needs no user interaction, and can have high impact. CISA KEV status and a 0.99647 EPSS percentile are the reason this is not a wait-and-see item. Check whether you run LiteLLM, verify versions against the vendor advisory, update to the patched release, restrict exposure, and review for suspicious activity or credential risk. This has been the Daily Ranked CVE Brief, What to Patch First, ranked by Real Exploitation Signal. If you want the rest of today's top 10, the full ranked report is linked in the description. Subscribe for the next Ranked CVE Brief tomorrow.